Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. We are going to take a couple minutes to let folks join and log in, and then we'll get started. It's so great to see such a wonderful crew of people. Should be an exciting conversation. So thanks everyone for joining us. Gonna give people just 30 seconds or so to join before we get started here. We have a lot to talk about, so we want to make sure that we have plenty of time for our panelists to share. There's a lot of wisdom in this group, so I'm just really excited. All right, well, we are going to get started to really respect everyone's time. And as I said, to make the most of this space and the time that we have with our panelists. So thanks again, everyone, for being here tonight for our migrant accompaniment panel. And just a couple of friendly reminders. So we would invite you to keep yourself on mute as much as possible, so that we can make sure we can hear our panelists. We have a number of folks joining, which is great. But that means if we have background noise, it can get very loud very quickly. So thank you in advance for muting yourselves. I really appreciate that. And I'll remind you later on in the session, but we'll invite you to put questions in the chat. We will have some time for questions and answers later on. And so if you have a question now and you want to put it in the chat, you are welcome. And then we'll address those later on in our session. So to give you a little bit of background, just really want to welcome everyone here. Our theme tonight is welcome. So welcome to each of you on behalf of the Kino Border Initiative and on behalf of JRS-USA Jesuit Refugee Services. This is a space to talk about accompanying people who are on the move. And, you know, we're in a moment in our country where we recognize that this conversation, these fear-based messages of hate and scapegoating people who are migrating, it's really prevalent. And we also know from our experience that there are so many people out there, including many people on this call tonight, who are doing the work of welcome already, who want to extend welcome or already are doing that in so many different ways. And so tonight is about amplifying that conversation around welcome, a conversation that we know is very much already alive in so many communities across the United States. So thanks again for joining us. I'm going to pass this over to Father Pete Neeley, who is going to share a prayer with us. And just a quick note that as many of you know, we at the Kino Border Initiative and JRS-USA, we come from a Catholic tradition, a Catholic framework, which Father Pete will share about. But we know there's a diversity of people joining, so we invite each of you to take this prayerful pause in a way that makes sense for you from your own tradition. And so I will pass it over to Father Pete.
Okay, very good. So what I'd like to do is, like Sister Tracey said, put this in a little context of the prayer and not just start the prayer out. This is from Pope Francis calling us, calling all Christians and believers to take a look at the role of migration, refugees, the stranger, and see the other, and using it in that context. You'll see the scripture that he uses coming from the Hebrew scriptures and from New Testament scriptures. And so there are 4 elements that he wants to do. So it's a kind of a call to action, if you will. It's something that it's universal. So this is these four elements are what they're calling the universal church. So as we know, what we're doing today, concentrating on our role in the United States and America to greet the stranger and the refugees, the migrants, the asylum seekers, very specifically is what we're going to be doing. But as part of a much bigger phenomena that's happening. The United Nations, as you all know, has said there are more people moving in the last 4 years than there have been in the history of the world. So just putting that into perspective. So these four things are welcome, protect, promote, and integrate. And welcoming calls for expanding legal pathways for entry and no longer pushing migrants and displaced people towards countries where they face persecution and violence. It also demands balancing our concerns about national security with concern for fundamental human rights. So as scriptures remind us, do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. Protecting has to do with our duty to recognize and defend the inviolable dignity of those who flee real dangers in search of asylum and security, to prevent their being exploited. I think in particular of women and children who find themselves in situations that expose them to risks and abuses that can even amount to enslavement. God does not discriminate. The Lord watches over the foreigner and sustains the orphan and the widow. Promoting entails supporting the integral human development of migrants and refugees. Among many possible means of doing so, I would stress the importance of ensuring access to all levels of education for children and young people. This will enable them not only to cultivate and realize their potential, but also better equip them to encounter others and to foster a spirit of dialogue rather than rejection or confrontation. Once again, Scripture says, God loves the foreigner residing among you, giving them food and clothing, and you are to love those who are foreigners, for you yourselves were foreigners in Egypt. Integrating, lastly, means allowing refugees and migrants to participate fully in the life of the society that welcomes them. As part of the process of mutual enrichment and fruitful cooperation in service of the integral human development of the local communities. St. Paul expressed it in these words, you are no longer foreigners and strangers, but you are fellow citizens with God's people. So we look at the goal of what we're trying to do, and the work that we do here at Kino is the hope of this panel will highlight and delve into the multifaceted work that in favor of refugees following guidelines of these four verbs of Pope Francis that indicated in this message of World Day of Migrants. So let's pray. Pray that we can grow in our common humanity and build together an ever greater sense of togetherness. Openness to one another creates spaces fruitful exchange between different visions and traditions, open minds to new horizons. We ask, Lord, to open our eyes, our ears, our hearts to the millions of forgotten migrants and refugees who suffer in silence on the streets of our cities and in hidden labor, victims of violence and war. In the face of indifference and impotence, we pray that no migrant or refugee feels left out or alone or abandoned, that they are entitled to acceptance and feel a love of family, so they know that their God does not forget them. We ask this, amen.
Thank you so much, Father Pete. Really appreciate you really grounding us in the reason why we're here. And I'm just going to move right ahead. So again, I'm Sister Tracey Horan. I am the Associate Director of Education and Advocacy with the Kino Border Initiative and Sister Providence of St. Mary of the Woods, Indiana. And I want to welcome our panel. So I'm just going to name the folks who are going to be sharing their wisdom tonight, and then I'm inviting each of them to introduce themselves. So we'll have Julien Patrick and Ashley Myler Klick from Holy Trinity Parish in Washington, D.C. And then Artem Ugadiarov and Audrey Hudgins are joining us from Seattle, Washington. And then we have Ellen Green joining us from Bridge to Rutland in Rutland, Vermont. So excited to have folks from different parts of the US who are all doing this beautiful work of welcome. So I'll invite Julien Patrick to introduce yourself first.
Hi everyone, it's a pleasure for me to be here. I am Julien Patrick, Tete Wabo. I live in Washington, D.C. I'm a migrant and I got to the United States 2 years ago. And I'm originally from Cameroon. I'm 30 years old and I got married a couple of months ago. Thank you.
Congratulations, Julien Patrick. Thank you so much and welcome. Ashley?
Hi, I'm Ashley Klick. I'm the Pastoral Associate of Social Justice at Holy Trinity Catholic Church in DC. I am originally from, I was born in Alabama and grew up in Georgia, went to college in Virginia, and that's how I ended up in DC. And we're thrilled to be here. So thank you for having us, Sister Tracey.
Thank you, Ashley. And I'll invite Artem.
Hi, everyone. My name is Artem. I am an asylum seeker and stayed at Kingdom, where they helped me with crossing the border. I was born in Russia, in the city of Belova. Now I live in the state of Washington with my friend Audrey.
Thanks, Artem. And speaking of which, Audrey.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name's Audrey Hudgins, and I was born in West Virginia and I was raised in Virginia. I've lived or traveled through 35 different countries, but I'm now based in Seattle and I'm a professor at Seattle University. I'm drawn to the study of migration because it's an exploration in transitions, and I've migrated myself, I've migrated many times, but in ways that are quite different from the folks that I've accompanied. A common denominator, though, is the way that we share the experience of transition and integration in new spaces and cultures and geographies. And so I'm excited to be here today with Artem and the rest of you to share our experience.
Beautiful. Thanks so much, Audrey. And Ellen.
I'm Ellen Green. I am the executive director of Bridge to Rutland, which is a 501c3 nonprofit. Can you hear me okay? Because my screen says unmute. Okay. We're closer to the Canadian border, but with our connection with KBI, we've been focused on the southern border. I was born in Watertown, New York, way up north. I was part of the sanctuary movement in the 1980s and traveled to El Salvador twice to accompany the people who were fleeing the 12-year civil war there. Our church, I was in Philadelphia at the time, and our church there had a partner church in El Salvador, and that's really drawn me to find out what's still going on at the border and to do what I can.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ellen. So now we're going to continue and just learning more about our panelists and gleaning this wisdom from them. So I'm going to start this question with Audrey and Artem. And you shared a little bit about this, but if you can speak about how you've been connected to migrant accompaniment over the past several years. And those of you who have migrated over the past several years, how you have accompanied others in migration as well, or the folks who have accompanied you. So Audrey?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I've hosted migrants twice now. First, a young woman named Audrey from Venezuela. During the pandemic, actually, her and I had passed through Kino at the same time. She came through Kino on her way to the United States while I was volunteering there, but we never met. And then when she was getting ready to be released from detention after she had won her case, she had nowhere to go. She got ghosted by a family member, and Kino reached out and asked if anyone would be willing to host her. So I raised my hand. And Audrey lived with me for a year from July of 2020 until August of 2021. And I'm now hosting Artem, and we've been together for a little shy of 2 months now. I see it as the experience of hosting is a means for me of living what I'm learning as a professor of migration studies, but I'll have to admit that they've both accompanied me in my learning about how to accompany. So I'm grateful for that opportunity.
Thanks, Audrey. And Artem, if you could share with us about your experience for you over the past several months.
This story time, yeah. I have a full story to share on my journey. On my journey, I passed to Istanbul. Turkey. At the airport, when I arrived, a Russian woman asked me to look after her things. She lived for a long time and caused me to miss my bus. Oh, I had to wait until she returned before I could catch the next bus. It's my first story. My next story, I met two Russian guys in Cancun, but they want to illegally cross the border with the help of a Georgian for charge $1,500 each. They offered for me to go with them, but I thought it was a stupid idea and didn't go. I think he just killed him. There's so much exploitation. I condemn those actions. My next story. This Slav story. I wrote in a Telegram chat that I needed help, and Slava responded. He wrote to me and said I should come to Kino. I'm grateful for this help. My last story is I went to the bus station in Cancun to buy tickets for the airport, and there was a long queue. I needed to buy bus tickets urgently and ended up buying tickets from people who did not need them. They were selling 2 tickets, and I had to buy both. There was a girl from Italy who was trying to get the airport, so I give her one of my tickets for free. She was grateful to me for that. Her name was Alicia. I finished.
Thank you, Artem. That's beautiful and also a very long journey. So thank you for sharing that with us, and also for the ways that you have accompanied others. Really appreciate that. And we'll continue now with the same question. I'll ask Julien, Patrick, and then Ashley to share, again, describing how you've been connected with migrant accompaniment from your perspective. So we'll start with Julien, Patrick.
Okay. As I said at the beginning, I'm a migrant and working together with Ashley. Everything started, I think, in 2016 when the political unrest started in my country with the French and English, and later on in 2018, we had a presidential election that were contested, because we thought elections were stolen. But because of what's going on with the power in place, they didn't want to let go. Of course, what they had to do was to kind of imprison and torture a couple of people. And from 2018, I had to flee, and I got myself to Ecuador, where I didn't know anybody, of course. I didn't know Spanish. And there, I tried to survive with the grace of God. And it was tough, being in a place where you don't know anybody, you don't know the language, and worst of it, you're in a culture where people judge you by the color of your skin. From Cameroon, where I am with people of my color, I get to a place where some people feel uncomfortable close to me. It was kind of stressing. I couldn't go to school and stuff like that. And after a year, I met this wonderful girl I'm married to today. She kind of, gave me hope again that everything was possible. And just on the side, I remember this day I almost committed suicide because I felt it was just too much for me to bear. But she kind of helped me overcome that and believe in myself again. And when I discovered that Ecuador was not a place for me, I decided to, walk to the United States. And I crossed over 8 countries. That is Colombia, Panama, Costa Rica, Honduras, Nicaragua, Mexico. And of course, we know how it goes. I didn't use a plane. I was walking. Sometimes I would take a train. I would take a car. Sometimes I would be placed in the boots of the car and stuff like that. So many people died in my hands. We had to dig some, sometimes in the forest, someone would die. We don't know what to do with the body. We just have to bury the body there. A lot of such experiences. And finally, when I got to Mexico, of course, I was still in contact with this beautiful girl. I called her and I told her, I have to go to the United States. I have to get into the United States. And of course, at that time, she was a student and she's still a student. She didn't know how to do. Of course, she tried to contact as many people as she could. And behold, she got in contact with Holy Trinity, where Ashley, belongs. And some people there fell in love with me, and that is how I finally decided to cross the border. I kind of went over the wall, When I went over the wall, I met a couple of police officers. I just handed myself over to them because I didn't know what was the next step. And I just told them, please do whatever you want to do with me. I'm safe. I'm sure I'm going to have food, and that is enough. And of course, given that my friend by then had contacted Holy Trinity, they were still kind of debating on whether they had enough resources. Therefore, when I got in, I didn't know that I was to meet a family waiting for me or anybody. Therefore, when I got in, I was still praying, and finally, I had these 2 wonderful ladies whom I call my moms, Maria Ray, she's not here, and Mary Lou, who said, yes, we're going to take him. And of course, today we have Ashley. She also said, we're going to take him. And they helped me fly to Washington, D.C. And since then, they kind of took care of me. They made sure I had a place to stay. And today I got married. I'm working at a school, and this is the little thing I can share about, my story. Thank you.
Thank you, Julien, Patrick. And I think one thing that's helpful. I mean, many things about your story are inspiring, but I think it's helpful to recognize the challenge of not knowing the next step, of knowing what to do. We talk to many people who turn themselves into immigration and don't necessarily know what the next steps are. I think that can be common. So thank you for shedding some light on that. Ashley?
So Holy Trinity's been in accompaniment since 2017 when we welcomed a family from Syria. And then that was an informal kind of accompaniment model. And then in 2018, after 2 parishioners had been at Kino, when they returned, they were invited to sponsor a young man named Mario. And so that's how our journey in accompaniment, our formal journey began. And today we have worked with 20 individuals or families from 11 countries. We're actively in accompaniment with 5. Julien Patrick doesn't count, he's a graduate now. And we're preparing to welcome a young woman from Haiti in the coming months. So, you know, this is a community work through our parish. It's very important to us, and you know, it's just grown, and our model has been successful. Most of the people that we have accompanied don't have a lot of contacts in the United States. They've been referred to us from Kino, JRS, or other Georgetown University law student care, other legal groups. And these are usually people like, I mean, Julien had a Pong, but he still was alone. And most of the individuals or families in our groups do not have any kind of community here.
Thanks so much, Ashley. And we'll go over to Ellen.
Bridge to Rutland began in mid-2020, and then there was the pandemic. So we were having a very hard time getting anyone across. And it was wonderful to work with Tracey, and she put us in touch with our first person who came across, and we chatted by phone occasionally. And finally, he was able to come across. At the same time, Bridge to Rutland works with 7 other groups in Vermont and New Hampshire. We have kind of an informal gathering once a month via Zoom to support each other and find out what's going on and what we can do to change laws in the state, et cetera. And they said, hey, we have a family of 3 coming across, I think it was in Texas, so can you take them? And we thought our person from KBI was never coming, and come to find out we had the family from California on a Saturday night and our person from KBI on a Sunday night, back to back. And so it was kind of a baptism by fire. We thought we were pretty with it. We thought we had all our ducks in a row, but we've learned a lot since. One of the questions that you asked us to think about ahead of time was for those who have migrated, about who has accompanied the people who are migrating. But I have to say that starting this work in Vermont, I mean, we're kind of in the middle of nowhere in terms of the southern border, but the northern part of our state is getting quite a few people coming through Canada. But we knew nothing. And so there was a group that accompanied us, and that was the Community Asylum Seeker Project from Brattleboro, Vermont. And they have been doing this work for 7 years. So when we started out, we had the help of them, and now we're in this much larger group. And we accompany each other as well as accompanying the people who come to us. Oh, one last thing. Our group is made up of 9 representatives from 9 faith communities and 4 social justice groups in our area. The town is, I don't know, 17,000 people. And so it's quite a big group working just on asylum, but we also have an office of USCRI, and they are bringing refugees to our town also. We're referred to as Vanilla Vermont. So this is kind of eye-opening for our community, and it's really wonderful. So we have Afghan Syrians, people from Ukraine, and then our Latin American friends. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ellen, and all of you for sharing the different ways that you have been accompanying. Just a lot of inspiring work happening So I'm going to ask now, I'll actually go back to you, Ellen. So Ellen, and then Ashley, and then Audrey, as folks who have sort of served as hosts, I'd love it if you could share something with us that you've learned about holistic, empowering accompaniment through this process, something that you wish you had known coming into this. You know, some of you have been doing this 3 years, some of you have been doing this 5 years. So something that you wish you had known coming in that you've learned throughout this process. So we'll start with Ellen.
Well, I have a laundry list here of things I wish I'd known at the beginning. I came to this as a Spanish teacher, but at the lowest level, so I am not fluent. So this has been fascinating. The model we were told that we should follow is to have a host family. And during the pandemic, we knew we'd need a couple of host families because we had a couple people who said they would take people in for 2 weeks for quarantine and then they could go somewhere else. And that just didn't seem to work out well. It worked for us to find them apartments close to each other so that they're in downtown, which isn't very big, but they have access to shopping, access to churches, access to each other. And we found that that was much more empowering because then they were more independent. But the first couple of weeks with the family meant that they were getting acclimated to the area and feeling more welcome and developing relationships. And then we found that just having a team of people surrounding each of our groups worked better for us than having them with a host family for a long time. It's very expensive though. We also learned that finding a pro bono attorney is really difficult. But once we have one, I wish we'd known this at the beginning. 2 of our guys came across as parolees. And so then their attorneys thought, well, okay, we'll give them the year and then we'll start them into asylum. And that way they'll be able to have longer in the US. And by the way, we'll start their EAD application for the work permit. But the problem is that the backlog is so big for the EADs that when they applied for asylum and then they were told, well, we can't process your work permit anymore because you have changed from parolee to asylum. Now you have to wait another 150 days to apply again. If I had known that ahead of time, it would have saved our guys a lot because the indignity of not having work, that's another thing we did learn though, is that we have lots of volunteer opportunities so that they're giving back to the community. So some of our guys were into construction anyway, so they work with Habitat for Humanity, and we have 2 guys who have a medical background that are volunteering at the hospital. So that works out well, but it's not the same. We found out that vetting and training volunteers isn't easy, but we have worked really hard at developing training for trauma-informed care, acceptance of cultural differences. Please remember, we live in vanilla Vermont and nobody thinks about it. The whole idea of the balance of power, which again, it's nice when they can have their own space, an apartment. And the whole idea of confidentiality and respect, mutual respect. The best thing I learned, but I think I knew this all along from being in the sanctuary movement, was if you're open to it, you can learn and get much more from those you're accompanying than they will ever get from you. And I think that's one of the things we've tried to instill in our volunteers is to don't impose what you think they should be doing, even though you know American culture, but just listen, learn from them, and see where you can meet in the middle. So those are the things I wish we'd all known at the beginning. Thanks.
Thank you, Ellen. And I'll pass it over to Ashley.
Similar lessons that Ellen has. I would say that the biggest challenge for our group is trusting in the slow work of God. You have a bunch of A personality Washingtonians who want to solve these things ASAP, make it happen. And that is just, as Ellen alluded to, backlogs, different changes in the political scope. For us, having people from from different 11 countries that come in with different goals, different education, different, some have a family of 6, some are single like Julien Patrick was. So we really have had to work to adapt to what the needs are of who we are trying to accompany. And our model is such that when someone is referred to us, we have to have 2 mentors. And the mentor, these are just 2 people who serve as liaison to the larger community. And we have a legal team. The challenge where we are is it's the DMV. It's Washington, DC, Maryland, and Virginia. And so we place people across, Holy Trinity represents 67 zip codes. So we have an abundance of volunteers, but there are different laws, healthcare access, education based on that. So we place, all of our families live in different locations. And I just share that because you try to, as you begin, our situations have always been urgent. Someone's being kicked out or someone just arrived. So we don't have a lot of time to prepare and think what's best. So we spend those early days with mentors trying to figure out what the healthcare needs are, what the legal needs are. Housing is very challenging in this area. So that really defines where we place individuals too. And our goal is that, after this model of accompaniment, because we do active accompaniment probably for 12 to 18 months. And that's why, I've heard a lot of people say, oh, sponsor somebody, from 90 days. You're not going to accomplish anything in 90 days. They're just getting over the trauma and they're overwhelmed. The systems here are overwhelming. And I think accepting that too, and being patient is part of what we've all learned, and being able to discern and making sure that, you're providing agency to that individual or family and not imposing your own, what you think might be the best way forward. I think it's fulfilling work. It's frustrating work. And I think that at the end of the day, we are so blessed to have people like Julien Patrick, Mario, I talked about, just to share, we just had a party for him this past Saturday. He received his asylum last November. He's headed to KBI next week, I think, to volunteer for a couple months, and then moving to sunny Florida. I think he's had his time with our weather. So when I say that too, the relationship just doesn't end. We call it a migrant familia. That's what our program is called. And so I've been meeting with all our families this week because we always regroup periodically to understand their goals and see where we can help. So actively, when people are waiting for their EAD or waiting for their legal status, we provide volunteer opportunities, like Ellen said. We enroll them in English classes. That's really a goal, that whether they speak English, then they work on their written English, whatever it might be. But then the other 15 families that we have, like Julien Patrick is a graduate, he just was enrolled in a graduate for social work. And so, we talked about that goal on Sunday when he and I met. So we're still here to kind of help facilitate friendship. I think what I said to Julien Patrick was that it's not a revolving door with us. We kind of slam the door once you join the family and you're stuck with us. So that's our model.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ashley. And I just want to name, there's some different lingo that's being thrown out a little bit. And I think you defined this, Ellen, but the EAD is the work permit. So just to for folks who are kind of new to this, to make sure we're defining those terms. And we'll go to Audrey.
Yeah, I sort of run a similar situation. My house is like Hotel California. You might check out, but you can never leave, which is what came up for me when Ashley was sharing. But the 2 folks that I've hosted are now part of my family, and so they may not live with me any longer, but we retain that relationship, and that's probably been the thing that's been most unexpected and of the greatest value is those enduring relationships that I hope continue for many years. I think for me, just on a basic level, getting to understand or coming to the understanding that we're really not that different from each other. I think I had this idea in my mind that we're not necessarily kindred spirits. They're from a different culture and a different country and all these different things. And it turns out there was really only 2 differences. One was that one of us had experienced forced displacement and the other one had not. And it could have very easily been me that had been in that situation. So coming to understand that the accident of my birth prevented me from having a situation of forced displacement. And on both occasions, I learned very quickly that I was not the smartest person in the room. And so there was a lot that I could learn from the other person. But there was one similarity, and that was that both of us wanted to live a fulfilling and dignified life. And so I would echo what Ellen and Ashley have said about respecting each other's values and dignity and lifting, recognizing our shared humanity. A couple of stories might help offer some clarity. One was with Audrey. When she came to me, she had received a status called withholding of removal, which is a higher standard to meet than asylum, but doesn't come with the same level of benefits. And most folks that are coming out of detention, ICE keeps their documents. So when Audrey came to live with me, all she had was the 8.5 by 11 piece of paper that said that she had gotten withholding of removal. No passport, no identity card, no nothing. And she kept saying, we need to go get an ID card. And I kept saying, there's so many other things that we need to be doing, and I didn't get it. And then I started to think about it. It was really hard for her. And so I started to think about it. And I was like, well, if I didn't have a passport and an ID card, I would feel unsafe and uncomfortable and unstable coming from a situation in which I was already experiencing a great lack of safety and instability and discomfort. And so we prioritized getting the ID card. Now that required us to go to ICE and beg to get the passport back so that we could take it to the DMV here to get a state ID card. And then Audrey had the bright idea of going to the same day to the bank and opening a bank account. Neither one of these things could have been done without having the passport in our hands. And she then had an ID card, and that sense of belonging, that sense of identity was so important in that moment. But then every situation's different. Artem came to me in a status called humanitarian parole. He had all of his documents. So getting an ID card and a bank account, was just so quick as to be absolutely ridiculous. But both of them have had the challenge of waiting a really long time for a work permit. Artem, some of the backlogs have actually been shrunk. And so we're hopeful to get a work permit in the next 6 months. But Audrey's took 9 months. And so that period of time, getting back to the idea of dignity, there's dignity in work, there's dignity in living a fulfilled life, there's a dignity in being able to have your own money to buy your own things. It's so simple, right? And so one of the things that we did was approach ESL classes as our work, right? So jumped right on getting into English classes, and that became the work until the real work could become available. The volunteering opportunities, like Ellen and Ashley have already talked about, those are ways in which we can feel as though we're living a fulfilled life and making a difference. I'll stop there.
Thanks so much, Audrey. So I want to switch gears a bit and invite Julien, Patrick, and Artem to share from their perspective. What was something that you think every host should know if they're considering the process of hosting someone? So something that you think these individuals who want to accompany folks, what is something you think that they should know? And Julien, Patrick, we'll start with you.
When I was going through the questions, I actually took time to write the answer to this one because I was thinking about it, like looking at my own life and what my mentors have been to me. And the first thing I had to say is that the mentor should know that God is the one giving you the opportunity to be Him into someone's life. I feel like when we take it that way, we take it with more ease. We don't have to say it's going to be just for 1 month, because as my predecessor said, I don't think in 9 months you can actually accompany someone in the United States, until is, because the least or the least moment you kind of leave the person is down again. I can't count how many times, apart from, having maybe to find a place to sleep, I needed to deal with my own emotions, with everything that happened to me. Therefore, a mentor should be someone who sees like himself as, a missionary into someone else's life, a migrant, as a matter of fact. And the next thing I wrote down is that as a mentor, you should just consider the person you are mentoring as any human being. Sometimes we like, I will take the example with myself. My two mentors, at the beginning, it was kind of, a little bit difficult because, I didn't know so much about the American culture, and they did not know about the Cameroonian culture. Therefore, we had to meet somewhere, and that somewhere is love, where they view me as their own son, and I had to see them as my moms. That is how everything went on smoothly. I think these are the two advices I could give to anyone who wants to be a mentor. Thank you.
I love that, Julien, Patrick, that we had to meet somewhere, and that's somewhere as well. That's a great quote. Beautiful. And Artem, if you could share with us, what advice do you have for hosts?
Okay. The right things host should be able to provide a safe place and have the means to cover basic needs and the capacity to help with the navigating the asylum process during the transition. Yeah.
Wonderful. Those are key things: safe place, basic needs, and helping along in the asylum process. Thank you, Artem.
Okay.
Yes, appreciate it. And so the next question, and I'll stick with you two, actually, Artem and Julien, Patrick. If you want to share, thinking about the things you want hosts to know as well, what is one moment on your journey with your host where you really felt that your dignity was being honored or recognized? Let's start with Artem.
Okay. The staff at Kino treated me very well and helped me on my journey. Since arriving to America, no one has been rude to me, and no one has been rude to me, and no one has called me names. I live with my friend Audrey. Here, no one is negative, and people are kind so far. I have no encountered bad people here, but I have seen homeless people who use drugs when I've gone downtown.
Thank you, Artem. I'm glad to hear that your experience has been positive so far. I know Audrey's a big part of that, and I hope that continues. What about you, Julien, Patrick?
Reflecting on this question, I almost did not know what to say because every single moment I spent with my mentors or people around me was just exceptional. But there is this particular, instance that I will never forget. When I came, it was so hard. I remember this day I was crying and she cried with me. Yeah, this is what I remember. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Julien, Patrick. That sounds like true accompaniment there. Yeah. Well, thank you both. And I'm going to turn back to Ellen and Ashley and Audrey. Maybe we'll start with Audrey this time. For many individuals who are wanting to host someone who is migrating, for example, asylum seekers, often they want to know about logistics, the costs, liability, and we don't have the time to address all of those concerns here. I think there are some great resources that we can share out with folks afterwards. But I would just say, what is one piece of advice that you would share about the logistics piece? And I'll start with you, Audrey.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been a journey. I think what comes up for me is the vital role that state and local agencies play in providing support for the variety of communities that can benefit from resources. So in Washington State, that's the Department of Health and Social Services, DSHS. It's a giant bureaucracy and it's super hard to navigate, but it's central to one's transition to a new place. And so we went there, Artem and I. I didn't know that with Ladry. I didn't go there because I didn't know about it, but Artem and I went there the other day, a couple of weeks ago, and walked in to see what services he might qualify for. And when we walked up to the information desk, I said, Artem's here and he would like to see about services, but he speaks Russian. Within 2 minutes, they had a Russian translator on the phone so that he could have the conversation for himself with the agent about what local, state, and federal assistance he might be able to apply for. Everyone's status is different. So it turned out Ladry wouldn't have qualified for these services because of her state, but Artem's status enabled him to qualify for food assistance. And that's been a great help for him to get connected to the local network. And when we were in that office, we learned about a variety of other services that support folks with low socioeconomic status or other specialized needs, everything from discounted cell phone service to discounted utilities, food and cash assistance, and those sorts of things. And so some states aren't as generous with some of these benefits, and that's what the wonderful collection of refugee resettlement agencies and other sorts of agencies like Catholic Community Services, Lutheran Community Services, and other organizations, what we would put in the bucket of non-governmental organizations, and the work that they do supporting these communities every day. And so being connected with those communities and those networks is so important to being able to support a dignified transition and to be able to, it takes a village, I think is the general idea. And I'd also like in my context to lift up the work of the Archdiocese of Seattle. They're doing a lot of work around this that sounds similar to what Holy Trinity is doing. And so it's just this great idea that there's so many like-minded people, and being in conversation and in community with them is one way to share resources and be able to make this happen, So it takes a village, and that village is a beautiful place. And I really appreciate being able to live there and work with all these people that have the same idea. Thank you.
Thanks, Audrey. And wouldn't it be something if every diocese, if every town had some kind of coalition like what you all represent here today? That's kind of the dream for me, to be able to replicate some of the great best practices you all have been doing. So thank you for that. And then I'll invite Ashley and then Ellen.
So I think, building on what Audrey said, community is important. It is hard work. I don't want to discount that. As Julien Patrick was saying, it's emotional work. You have to be available. I mean, again, and I don't know if this is just unique to our area, but when a lot of humanitarian parolee was happening last year, a lot of organizations and individuals were saying, oh, you just have to host someone for 90 days. And it just is not going to happen in 90 days. So I always just want to make sure people understand that this is a journey. I know some organizations ask you to just commit to 1 year or whatever. We don't do that. You know, we try, our goal is stability and sustainability. And sometimes, you know, for one family we welcomed in April, they were ready to be on their own by October. Other people, you know, we've been working with them for 3 years. So I just think you need to understand that it is a journey, patience with yourself and patience with the process, and just patience is important. And you know, we don't rely on a lot of the services, kind of like what Audrey has said, that we've kind of built our own networks. And I think that's just where we are and the way the DMV works. But, you know, I met with a young man today who was trying to assist 222 Nicaraguans who are across the country, who are don't speak English, don't have any resources. And, you know, 7 are in my neighborhood. So we are going to try to help them. But that leaves a lot of people out in the world. So just to build on what you are saying, Tracey, that it would be so wonderful if that we had this connection across the United States where we could support these individuals, because it's scary, you know, not to know English, not to understand the systems. I mean, it's really hard for parents to navigate our education system, the healthcare system. These are not, you think how frustrated you get waiting on hold or pushing all the buttons to get to your doctor's appointment. Just imagine how much more challenging that is. I'll stop there. Sorry. Not even answer the question. I'm not sure.
Yes.
Patience.
Yes. Patience and logistics, I think, can be very much connected. So yes. Thanks, Ashley. What about you, Ellen?
Well, just building on the patience, I think I can sing the jingle for all of the on hold buttons for all of the agencies in Vermont. Yeah. But when we started out, we didn't know that we could get any of the services, and most of them we can't until they get their work permit and a social, pardon me, social security number. So what we did, it all started, I belong to Grace Congregational United Church of Christ. And in 2020, we were studying what was going on the border and realized that if we were going to do anything, we couldn't do it as one congregation. And that's when we reached out and got 8 other faith communities to begin supporting us. And in that coalition, and the people from the social justice groups, who some of them are not at all churched and have absolutely nothing to do with church and don't want to hear about it. When we made our first budget, they said, well, we don't have a good bottom line there. And I went, oh, it'll happen. Well, how can you be sure? And I said, well, you don't want to hear it, but those of us in the room who have dealt with this kind of stuff before, we just think this is going to happen. And it's been interesting to watch them sort of get pulled along into the idea of when we work together, and most of us say with a higher power, that in fact, we can make it happen. And so I think it's patience, but it's also confidence and reaching out to others. So for example, in our area, we have 2 different medical practices that are pro bono family care for our families, because I just went and sort of begged at their doors. And then when our first man ended up in the hospital, I went to the hospital and I said, so what can you do for us? Because we can't afford any of these bills. What do we do now? And they just sat down and worked out the whole thing. And we now have 8 singles here. I mean, that doesn't sound like a lot, but we're just getting started, you know. And the hospital has carte blanche for all of them. And it's amazing to me. You're right, Audrey, we've gotten lower phone rates and lower heating rates. And for a while, there was the, let me see, Vermont Emergency Rental Assistance Program. And so we didn't have to pay rent for over a year. That comes to an end in June. So now we're going to have to raise a ton of money, but we're working on it. And the first man who came to us, and Tracey, you know who this is, just got his work permit, and I took him to his first job interview last Friday, and we're all on pins and needles to see if he's going to get his job. And eventually we will wean them off our support. But you're right, it's a relationship that lasts for a very long time. From both sides, we want it to. And I think that that's a really thing to understand that it takes the whole community. Don't be afraid to ask, because the most somebody can say is no. Okay, move on to the next one. And just have confidence that we're doing the right work, even when it doesn't feel like it at times. So thank you so much for this, Tracey and Audrey and Ashley and Julien, Patrick and Artem. This has been great.
And thanks for your sharing as well, Ellen. So that concludes our formal questions for tonight. I'm going to switch things up a little bit because I'm getting some messages of folks that are moving on to other Zooms and things. I do want to have time for questions and answers, but I actually want, first of all, I want to invite Audrey, all of these great tips and just the wisdom from you all who have been doing this work. She has come up with this great ABCs of accompaniment that I'm going to ask Katie to share in the chat. So this is something, and again, we're recording this, so I'm happy to share the recording, happy to share some of these resources and links that you're going to see and hear in a follow-up email. So if you registered for this Zoom, then you'll be receiving those. But the ABCs of accompaniment, I just think is super creative, and there are a number of things on this document that Audrey created that touched on tonight, but just a lot of great things to remember. A wonderful resource for those of you who are already doing this work or thinking about stepping into this work in some way. And so Giovanna, I'm actually going to hand it over to you. So many of you might be sitting there thinking, what can I do? And one thing we want to invite you into is to sign up for the Migrant Accompaniment Network. And so I'm going to pass it over to Giovanna Nieto from JRS-USA to share with us a little bit more about what that is and how they can get involved.
Thank you, Tracey. I know I only have maybe like 2 minutes. So I shared the link in the chat where you can learn more, but I do want to just say, hearing from both sides of those who are involved in this type of life-changing experiences. And I think more than the beauty of accompaniment is that our job is not to mold refugees into fitting into to our way of life, but that we get to share a new culture and we get to show them compassion and welcome them and just help them on their journey. So there was just a lot to think about during the discussion today. So everyone in the panel, awesome. I really enjoyed what everyone had to say. So if you're looking to get involved, I know that sometimes we think that only by hosting individuals or becoming a sponsor, that's the only way to be of assistance. But with our program, we accept companions, our volunteers, we call them companions, to offer any level of assistance that is within their capacity, whether it's just transportation, just being a friend who checks up on our families, our beneficiary, helps them enroll the children in school, helps them with groceries from time to time. So it's not always committing to a full sponsorship. So I think that's what makes our network one of a kind, because it gives flexibility and it allows people to get involved however they can. The goal of the network is to have companions throughout the entire United States. What do we ask of our companions? Mostly that they offer a human connection. For recently arrived individuals, we know that the journeys that they experience are far from easy, and we hear stories of people who never expected that they would have to leave their home. And now they find themselves in a foreign country, learning the language, learning the culture, having to navigate all of these difficult systems, legal. So if someone offers them friendship and humanity, that can change the course of their integration process. So that's what we try to foster within our network. We have luckily been able to connect beneficiaries to assistance in over 29 cities within the United States. Here's a list. Through our networks with Holy Trinity, with West Province, with the Jesuit Network, KBI. So we expect to see that grow more and more as we continue to collaborate. How do we recruit volunteers? Through talks like this. The link is in the chat. You can go in, sign up, and you'll receive an application. We do vetting for our applicants, so a background check is involved. This is to ensure the safety of our applicants and of the beneficiaries that we serve. And yeah, I think this pretty much sums up what today's talk was. So just really quick, I love to share this because we had Sister Stephanie Spandel, who visited in summer of 2021 here at the border. By the way, my name is Giovanna. I didn't introduce myself, and I am the coordinator for the JRS-USA Migrant Accompaniment Network. So my role is to recruit companions to join our network. So Sister Stephanie joined us last summer of 2021, and was visiting shelters, but she only had 3 weeks of time to spend with us. And there was a lot of restrictions as to who could go into the shelters and offer assistance because of COVID. And she said she felt a bit frustrated because she didn't know if in her short time, she would actually be able to make an impact in the lives of the people that we were serving at the shelters. So she prayed, and what came to her so clearly, she says, was Jesus in the face of his crucifixion, and how one act of compassion, such as wiping a tear from Jesus's face, showed immense love. So even small acts of compassion and accompaniment make a huge difference for our beneficiaries. And with their permission, here are some pictures of some of the families and individuals that we've served through accompaniment, and now they're integrated and children are going to school, people are going to work, and they're just thriving, which we know that is possible thanks to their resilience and the love and friendship that they have been able to receive from companions, from the Catholic network, the Jesuit network. Here's my contact information if you have any questions, and I did share the link in the chat if you would like to register or learn more about how to become a companion for the network. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Giovanna. And so as you heard, the link is in the chat, and I'm going to share my screen again. So we just heard one way to welcome, and that's getting involved in the JRS-USA Migrant Accompaniment Network. A couple of other things, you know, we always at Kino are focused on the 2 feet of justice. So accompanying people in this moment where they're living the result of an injustice, but also addressing the injustice itself. And so those of you looking for a way to advocate with legislators, you may have heard about the Biden administration proposing this rule that would really be a challenge for people who are migrating from other countries outside of Mexico. And so people coming from Central America, from South America, from other places, attempting to access asylum at our southern border. The proposed rule would force them to apply for asylum in every country on their way to the border. And so, you know, we heard from Julien Patrick that would have meant 8 different countries for him to apply and be denied in each of those countries before actually being able to access safety in the US. So I think it goes without saying, but it's something we're very concerned about, especially impacting people who are arriving here and their ability to access safety. And we know that the countries that many of them are passing through don't have, in many cases, a functioning system that can provide safety. We're talking about governments where there is a lot of corruption and impunity. And so that's one way that you can take action is writing a comment. So there is a period for public comments, and every individual public comment has to be considered by the Biden administration before they would put this rule into effect. And so the website is there. Again, I'll send this out to all the folks who are registered here, but you can go to the website and you can use a template to create your own comment. And we really encourage people to write their own individual message. Why does this matter to you? Your opinion on the issue, your experience, because every individual comment that is unique will have to be considered. And then for those of us who are Catholic, Christian, that are recognizing the season of Lent, it's a great opportunity to bring prayer for and with migrants into the season. And the link that I'm sharing here is the Way of Asylum, and it was developed by one of our volunteers and partners in Tucson, that it connects the way of the cross with the experience of people who are seeking asylum, so families that are seeking safety. And so it's one way to connect this advocacy and this discernment and conversation around welcome and solidarity with the practice of Lent, for those of you who practice that. So those are some ways that we're encouraging you to welcome tonight. And I want to open it up for questions. Thank you also, Katie, for putting those links in the chat. And so at this time, I'll open the floor to questions. You can put your question in the chat. You can also raise your hand to ask a question, really taking advantage of the wisdom that we have in our wonderful panelists here. So feel free to ask. Any questions that you have. You can also make comments as long as they're respectful and helpful to our conversation. Celia. Sylvia, you're on mute, sorry.
Sorry. It's not so much a question as a comment. I just I hosted a family for 9 months. They just left on Saturday. So I can relate to a lot of the things that I heard tonight. And I think that the most important part is to have a community of people that support you. Otherwise, the weight is way too much for one person. And that's I found myself, I didn't have that support group like the Holy Trinities. I know because my son goes to that church. I know what they are, and I know that they and the people that have spoken, they had that support. So that is vital for anybody thinking about hosting a family. Find yourself a church group, something that really supports you.
Thank you, Sylvia. Who else has questions for our panelists? So we have a question in the chat. If the court denies asylum, but they have applied for TPS, which stands for Temporary Protected Status, can they succeed? I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know if others of our panelists have an answer for that. None of us are immigration lawyers. So that would be my first response, would be to contact your immigration lawyer. That's always my response when I'm not sure. I'm not seeing any of our panelists jumping to answer, so they might say the same. Audrey?
Yeah, I mean, I would be, yeah, go ahead, Audrey.
I'll just say that Ladry came to me with a status called withholding of removal. And then when Venezuelans got offered TPS, she went ahead and applied for it. So now she has sort of 2 levels of protection, if you will. And so I'm not a lawyer, nor do I play one on TV, but I would think if TPS is available, I would take it, because there's no expense to apply for it. And if you meet the criteria, I mean, why not?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So I would check with your attorney, or if you meet the criteria, I don't know why you wouldn't pursue it.
Thank you both. And all of us as non-immigration lawyers who cannot legally give legal advice would say, check with your lawyer. And going back to the importance of having access to a lawyer, being able to consult with them on these kinds of questions. Thanks for the question, Rex. And Daniela asked in the chat, have you heard of individuals whose passports and other documents were returned to them after the immigration hearings? And I'm not sure, Daniela, if you want to clarify, are those folks who were then deported, or are those folks who had their documents confiscated? That to just get a little clarity on that question. I'm not sure if Daniela is still with us. Oh, okay. People who had their documents confiscated. Okay. I have not heard of that. I don't know if any of our panelists have had a situation where passports or documents had been confiscated and then returned to them after the hearings. What I can say for us at Kino is for folks who are detained and then deported, there are a number of folks, sometimes people are expelled or deported with their belongings, and sometimes we can connect with the consulate to see if their belongings are still being held, and they can actually get those back.
Audrey has withholding of removal, and that's a status that's sort of, air quotes, permanent, but ICE still has her documents, and her hearing has been over with for almost 3 years. And my understanding, she has an annual ICE check-in, so every year. She used to have to go every week. Now she goes every year, but they keep her documents. So that's, at least for that particular situation, what happens with the documents.
Thank you, Audrey. The next question we have here from Alex. I'm in a welcome circle and we're hoping to submit our I-134A this week. So the document stating the financial support that you are committing to someone, which for some processes that's necessary and for some it isn't. So when our family gets here, what's the average turnaround time to get a work permit and Social Security numbers? We're using the humanitarian parole program. And Alex, just to confirm with you, when you say the humanitarian parole program, do you mean one that was announced for Venezuelans, Cubans, Nicaraguans, and Haitians? I'm assuming that's the case.
And it's welcome.us. I think that's still Ukrainians and Afghan. I don't know. I would tell you that it depends. We have a Ukrainian family and they were able to get access to work without their EAD. They just had to have the information from the government. That has not been the case for any other group. So I would say, we won't use Julien Patrick's example because he's had a horrible example for the EAD, but I would plan on 6 months if you're lucky. I mean, just plan for that, but maybe you'll get it sooner.
And I did get a response from another participant in the chat who said that they had documents returned by ICE after being granted asylum. So that's another possibility. Thanks for sharing that. And I'll take this one question from the chat and then I'll go to you, Christopher. So this question is for those who accompany. What is the driving force behind your passion for this specific mission? It takes a lot to lay down your time and comforts and make sacrifices for people that you don't know. So what is your driving force?
For me, I felt called. I don't know how to put it any other way. And once you get a call, you have to follow it. And I also have the support of my family and my church family and my community. So, yeah.
Anyone else want to speak to your driving force?
I mean, if I answer as an employee of Holy Trinity, I would say that we're following the universal apostolic preferences to walk with the excluded. For me personally, you know, I think we talked a lot about human dignity, and I don't know why I wouldn't. You know, I think when I was in Juarez last September, and I met some nuns working, and and I think Mother Teresa had a similar story, but the woman said every day they just do what presents itself. And so this is what is presenting itself for me and for our community, and we are able to do it. So it's not that I don't have a calling, like kind of like what Ellen said, but it's enriched my faith. My faith is stronger for it. I mean, people like Julien Patrick and Mario, and they're inspirations. So it's a gift for me. So I'm just doing it because I can, and we are here to do it, but I get a lot out of it too.
Yeah, I think Artem and I actually had a conversation about this the other day, and it sort of came down to if the situations were reversed, would you do the same? You know, just if I felt like if I was in that situation, I would want someone to care enough to do something, and so I can't not do something, and I'm not. Or do I play one on TV? It just that's what I feel like I need to do.
Thank you, all three of you. And Christopher.
Hi, I work for the Archdiocese of Seattle, where we help parishes set up welcome circles for Ukrainians, Cubans, Venezuelans, Haitians, you know, people on humanitarian parole, as well as asylum seekers and really anybody else who they want to form a circle around. And I just wanted to mention about the work permits. And it is true that Ukrainians, Ashley, as you were saying, Ukrainians and Afghans can work as soon as they get here, the ones who come on humanitarian parole. Venezuelans, Cubans, Nicaraguans, and Haitians, it's really kind of unclear, right? I mean, you know, the fact that Ukrainians and Afghans could do it, that wasn't true at first when they first came. And when the Ukrainians were coming, the ones who came last spring were waiting more than 5 months for their work permits. And when they made it so that, well, and then they decided they were going to do this first come first or last in first out thing, where they were going to, there was this situation last fall where Ukrainians who had applied in the spring were still waiting, but Ukrainians who were applying in September and October were getting their work permits within a few weeks. So I just offer this because we don't know what's going to happen with the other 4 countries that are now eligible for it. If they make it this thing called, well, where they base, you know, the administration could say, as they did with Ukrainians and Afghans, if you're here and you have humanitarian parole, you can start working right away while you apply for your work permit. And that's what we hope to have happen, but we don't know. So it is the Ukrainians, it was taking at one point about 6 months. Doesn't really add a lot of clarity, but.
Yeah, thank you for that, Christopher. And the point I would just make with that is, I think that's another piece where advocacy is very important, because there's a couple bills right now. One of them that is particularly good going around in this legislative session in Congress, asking to speed up the process for people seeking asylum to get work permits. And so I'm happy to share more information about that bill in the follow-up email, but it's a place where, you know, a lot of us could lift up our voices and say, you know, this doesn't make sense. People are here, they want to work. So why should we force them to wait 6 months or a year or longer to get access to a work permit? Thanks, Christopher. And then Bob Key in the chat had the question, what are the legal responsibilities and does that differ depending on the status? So So who would like to answer that? I'm assuming you mean, Bob, the legal responsibilities for a host. Yes, okay, he's nodding. So what are the legal responsibilities for a host? Thanks, Ellen.
Well, hosting and sponsorship can be two different things because you can have a whole group that is the sponsor and takes care of the finances, etc. Hosting, that was one of the questions that our families asked first. What happens if this person up and leaves? Is there anything that we're responsible for? And the answer is no. And not even if you're a sponsor. Sponsorship means that you are promising legally to see to the needs of these people who are coming to us. But if they choose to leave, that is their choice and we are not responsible. They are independent people. We're here to accompany.
Thanks, Ellen. Ashley or Audrey, do you want to add to that?
Nope. I mean, I would agree with that, you know, sponsoring is different. I mean, sponsoring is when you have to, you know, provide a lot of documentation to get a match and then approval for one of these countries that, that Christopher just talked about. Hosting, I mean, it's not it's a relationship that at any time someone may want to walk away from. And so that's okay. There's no obligation legally. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, if you're asking, you know, in our model, we really encourage the individual seeking asylum not to work illegally, to take that time we focus on mental health, we focus on ESL. I mean, we have the ability to provide the support necessary so they don't feel that stress or pressure to have to do that. So I don't know if that's part of that question, but there's no legal obligation.
Yeah, I would just add that in my view, the commitment is just simply moral. If Artem decided tomorrow that he wanted to go live somewhere else, that he can do that. You know, my hope is that relationship continues, but you know, as Ellen said, he's an independent person. He can make his choices, but there's not a legal obligation as a host.
Yeah, and so I think, you know, the parole program for Venezuelans, Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans does require filling out that it's the I-134. So, you know, in that case, that would be more of a sponsorship situation where you're taking on some responsibility or signing on to say, you know, I can provide certain amount of financial stability. Whereas for others who are coming in from different places, who they just have to provide a name, address, phone number. And as Audrey said, you know, morally, there are certain things that we would hope would also go along with that accompaniment that we've been talking about all night. But as far as legally, it's different in those cases. Yes, and the question.
Oh, sorry. I just want to say one, and I think if anyone's looking at that sponsorship form, it's daunting. So when you look at it, you're providing a lot of information, and just to reassure you that part of that is to avoid human trafficking systems and other, you know, opportunities where, you know, something morally or an injustice could happen. So I think that, you know, that's why I know we've had some people saying like they want so much information and they're asking all these questions, but that's part of the purpose.
Thank you for highlighting that, Ashley. Really appreciate it. And I think this is a good question to go out on. How will the recording be available to us? And so if you are on this Zoom call, that means you are registered and we have your email address. And so you'll be receiving a follow-up email. We'll include the links that were shared for actions that you can take. We'll include a link to this recording and some other resources. So I just want to say another huge thank you to all of our panelists tonight, to JRS-USA for co-hosting, and Giovanna for all of the work that you do with the Migrant Accompaniment Network. I hope that you get a whole bunch of new people signing up as a result of this Zoom call. And thanks to each of you. Many of you we know are already doing this work. And so it's great to be able to call on this broader community, as Audrey was saying. I think it was Audrey. I think you all said this in different ways, that it takes a village. So thanks for being part of that village tonight, and just really looking forward to continuing to build more welcome with all of you, and have a great night, everyone. Take good care.